In 1987, the quiet town of Idaho Falls, Idaho, was gripped by terror. An unseen predator stalked under the moonlight, sowing death among innocent lives. Paul Ezra Rhoades, a 30-year-old man with vacant eyes and a heart ravaged by drugs, turned 3 winter weeks into an unforgettable nightmare. 3 lives were brutally extinguished and a community was ripped apart. In today's video, we'll delve into the chilling details of his last meal, the haunting final words he uttered before his gaze faded, and the lingering question, was justice truly served, or was it simply another nightmare brought to an end? Paul Ezra Rhoades was born on January 18, 1957, in Idaho Falls, Idaho, into what appeared to be an ordinary family. The eldest of 4 siblings, young Paul grew up amidst childish laughter, punctuated by the incessant arguments of his parents, Augustus and Pauline Rhoades. But fate had already etched a cruel mark upon his life. At just 4 years old, Paul contracted polio. The long, arduous days spent in hospitals, the tormenting pain in his fragile body, transformed him into a solitary child, perpetually on the fringes of the world. At home, the suffocating atmosphere was no different from the hospital. Paul's parents constantly bickered, their quarrels like knives carving into his soul. By age 10, Paul sought refuge in alcohol to escape reality. Just a few years later, he dropped out of high school, sinking deep into drug addiction, a poison that corroded him from within. Methamphetamine became his constant companion, transforming Paul from a timid boy into an unstable man, perpetually craving something to fill the void in his soul. To survive, Paul drifted through various odd jobs, from construction to drywall installation, wandering across Idaho and neighboring states. But by night, he transformed into a phantom, breaking into homes, stealing anything of value. Each petty theft nurtured a demon within him, ready to explode into something far more horrifying. The winter of 1987 saw Idaho Falls and Blackfoot enveloped in a biting cold. Yet, that chill was nothing compared to the pervasive fear that had taken root. A killer was lurking somewhere, and no one knew when he would strike again. Stacey Dawn Baldwin, 21, was working the night shift at the Red Mini Barn convenience store in Blackfoot on February 28, 1987. This young woman, with her radiant smile, had just married, dreaming of a happy future. But that night, her dream was dealt a fatal blow. Paul Rhoades walked into the store, his eyes bloodshot from methamphetamine. He didn't just want money, he wanted control, dominance. Stacey was held at gunpoint, forced into his pickup truck, and driven to a secluded area. She bravely tried to resist, fleeing across a snow-covered field, but Rhoades, like a relentless predator, fired 3 shots into her back. The next morning, Stacey's body was found at an archery range 5 miles from Blackfoot, her blood staining the white snow. The robbery yielded only a few dollars, but the cost was an entire life. Just 10 days later, on the morning of March 17, Nolan Haddon, 20, was working at Buck's convenience store in Idaho Falls. The young man with flowing blonde hair, apprenticing at a technical school, had no idea that death was near. Rhoades entered, gun in hand. Some investigators later suspected that Rhoades mistook Nolan for a woman because of his long hair, but that detail ceased to matter. He robbed the store, forced Nolan into the store's walk-in cooler, and fired 5 shots into him. Nolan was found hours later lying in a pool of blood, his breath shallow. Despite being rushed to Eastern Idaho Regional Medical Center, he took his last breath. The community of Idaho Falls began to panic. 2 murders in less than 2 weeks. Who would be the next victim? On March 19, 1987, Susan Michelbacher, 34, a special education teacher at Eagle Rock Junior High, left home early to drop off lesson plans. She felt unwell, intending to return home shortly thereafter, but she never did. Rhoades had been stalking Susan from a supermarket parking lot. He pulled her into his pickup truck, forcing her to cash 2 checks totaling $1,000, 0 cents, at 2 different banks. Afterward, he drove her to a remote lava field west of Idaho Falls. There, Susan was shot 9 times, her blood seeping into the volcanic rock. More horrifying still, she was raped, possibly even post-mortem. Susan's body was discovered 2 days later on March 21, a grim warning that Idaho Falls was no longer safe. Rhoades' brutality wasn't limited to these 3 murders. On March 3, a female student at Ricks College, now Brigham Young University, Idaho, in Rexburg, reported being robbed of $90, 0 cents, kidnapped at gunpoint, and raped in a potato cellar near Walker Siding. She was fortunate enough to be released, and her testimony, describing a tall, long-haired man, driving a pickup truck, matched clues police were already pursuing. Though Rhoadesburg did not prosecute Rhoades for this incident, the information proved crucial in tightening the noose around him. On March 25, Rhoades crashed his mother's car near Wells, Nevada, and wandered into a casino. Police found the car, confiscating a handgun and ammunition. Upon examination, they were stunned. The bullets in the gun matched perfectly with those from the murders in Blackfoot and Idaho Falls. On March 27, Rhoades was arrested at the casino, still dazed from drugs. As he was being escorted, he unexpectedly blurted out, "I did it." This vague confession became the key that unlocked a horrifying chain of crimes. Rhoades was extradited back to Idaho, facing charges for the murder of Susan Mitchellbacher, along with kidnapping, robbery, rape, desecration of a body, and weapons violations. The murders of Baldwin and Haddon were tried separately, ensuring each of his heinous crimes was brought to justice. On January 18, 1988, the first trial began in Bonneville County. Rhoades, now 31, sat in the courtroom in a rumpled suit, his eyes avoiding contact. Notably, Idaho Governor Cecil Andrus nearly became a juror, but was excused as he had signed the order for Rhoades' extradition from Nevada. Prosecutors presented compelling evidence, bullets from Rhoades' gun and the testimony of witness Valerie Staff, who saw a man resembling Rhoades in a pickup truck with a woman resembling Susan on the morning she disappeared. Detective Victor Rodriguez sent ripples through the courtroom when he testified that Rhoades had confessed to killing Susan while in custody, though he failed to record the statement due to oversight. Defense attorney John Radin countered, accusing Rodriguez of lying, but the jury was swayed by the undeniable physical evidence. On January 26, the trial was delayed for 2 hours because Rhoades' suit was at the dry cleaners, but that delay did not save him. The next day, after less than 5 hours of deliberation, the jury found Rhoades guilty on all counts. On March 24th, Judge Larry Boyle sentenced him to death for murder, along with life imprisonment for the other crimes. As the verdict was read, Rhoades erupted in a rage, throwing a chair at the prosecutor, but was immediately subdued by police. On March 3, the Baldwin trial began in Bingham County. Rhoades' lawyers attempted to cast doubt, arguing that the evidence was circumstantial, such as unusually large shoe prints or a watch believed to belong to Baldwin found on Rhoades. They claimed Rhoades' mother had bought the watch as a Christmas gift, but the prosecutor countered. The bullets from Rhoades' gun and the shoe prints were irrefutable. On March 12th, Rhoades was found guilty. On May 13, Judge James Herndon handed down a second death sentence, along with life imprisonment and 45 years for related charges. On April 25, Rhoades pleaded guilty to the Haddon case with conditions to avoid a lengthy trial while still reserving the right to appeal. He was sentenced to 2 life sentences, though he continued to maintain his innocence. Nevertheless, the evidence from the gun bullets to his brutal behavior painted the portrait of a cold-blooded killer. For the next 24 years, Rhoades lived in an 8 to 12-foot cell at the Idaho Maximum Security Institution, windowless, allowed out for only 1 hour a day to see the sky through a steel fence. He and his lawyers filed continuous appeals, citing his unfortunate childhood, drug addiction, and arguing that lethal injection was cruel and unusual. But every effort was rejected. Rhoades spent his time reading, drawing, and receiving visits from his mother, the only woman who didn't turn her back on him. He claimed to have changed, to feel remorse, but the victims' families didn't believe him. "He's a coward," Nolan Haddon's mother stated. "He never really faced his crimes." On November 18, 2011, after the U.S. Supreme Court refused to review his final appeal, Rhoades received his execution order. He was transferred to a special cell, facing the execution chamber where his fate would be sealed. The final moments had arrived. On the morning of November 18th, 2011, at the Idaho Maximum Security Institution in Boise, Paul Ezra Rhoades, now 54, walked into the execution chamber. Outside, about 50 protesters opposed to the death penalty held signs asking, "What would Jesus do?" Meanwhile, a small group supporting capital punishment stood silently across the way. Rhoades was served his last meal, hot dogs, baked beans, and strawberry ice cream. The night before, he had a light meal of cheese and crackers and took sedatives to remain calm. Lying on the injection gurney, hands and feet shackled, he looked at his mother one last time through the glass. With a clear voice, he said, "I'm sorry to Bert Mickelbacher for my role in his wife's death. To the Baldwin and Haddon families, you must continue your search. I can offer no help. I am sorry." He then turned to the warden and said, "Mom, goodbye. Brothers, I forgive you truly." The Baldwin and Haddon families were enraged. "He lied to the very end," Stacy's brother whispered. "How cowardly," Nolan's mother said. But a friend of the Michelbacher family breathed a sigh of relief. "The devil has gone home." At 9:15 a.m., after 22 minutes, Rhoades was pronounced dead. His body was cremated and the ashes given to his lawyer. Idaho concluded its first execution in 17 years, but the pain of the families remained unclosed. Paul Ezra Rhoades, a name that once sent shivers of terror through Idaho Falls in 1987. Who was he? A child whose soul was stifled by an unfortunate childhood, a man whose sanity was incinerated by drugs, or a monster in human form born to sow death? 3 lives. Stacey Baldwin, Nolan Haddon, Susan Michelbacher were brutally stolen by his hand, leaving bleeding scars forever etched in the hearts of those who remained. On November 18, 2011, as the lethal injection stilled his heart, justice seemingly prevailed. But was it merely a somber note in an unending cycle of retribution where blood answered blood and sorrow piled upon sorrow? Imagine a small town bathed in cold moonlight, where families once embraced in joy now face empty chairs around their dining tables. Stacy, the 21-year-old dreaming of marital bliss, was shot dead in a snow-covered field. Nolan, the 20-year-old with flowing blonde hair, fell in the cold storage room of a convenience store. Susan, the dedicated 34-year-old teacher, was dragged into the darkness of a lava field. They weren't just victims. They were stories interrupted, dreams brutally extinguished. Rhoades didn't just steal lives. He stole hope, faith, and the very light from an entire community. Did roast death in that cold execution chamber in Boise truly soothe that immense pain? Or was it simply an ancient ritual where society attempts to mask its own fear of the darkness within itself? He offered an apology in his final moments, but can those words, whether genuine or feigned, ever restore what was lost? And what about us, those who bear witness from afar? Should we confine such lost souls endlessly in windowless cells? Should we end their lives to appease our anger? Or should we seek ways to prevent such monsters from being born in the first place? The story of Paul Ezra Rhoades isn't just a criminal file. It's a mirror reflecting humanity's darkest corners, where the line between victim and perpetrator can sometimes be far more fragile than we imagine. It reminds us that darkness can lurk within anyone, but so too can the light of justice, compassion, and forgiveness. What are your thoughts on Rhoades' fate? Was his death justice, or just another chapter in a relentless tragedy? Please share your reflections in the comments section. Every opinion is a piece in humanity's larger narrative. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button and the notification bell to join us on future journeys into the truth of criminal cases